Hello, social workers, mental health professionals, and change agents. Welcome to another episode of season 4 of the Social Work Rants podcast. I'm your host, Bash Moreno. Saludos a todos. Greetings, everybody. Thank you for tapping in. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on YouTube. Type in the Social Work Rants podcast on YouTube and hit the red subscribe button. You can follow the podcast on Instagram at the Social Work Rants podcast. That's all one word. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Social Work Rants. You can also follow the podcast on Facebook. Just type in the Social Work Rants podcast, hit the like button and tune in, tap in, and enjoy all the wonderful content I'm trying to produce. So 2022, the year I'll get this video content to get it together. So y'all can enjoy the visuals of the podcast online. So my guest, we go back all the way to 2009. One of my many wonderful professors at the grad school I went to that shall remain nameless from my perspective, taught research 1 and 2 in grad school, long time ago, many moons ago. Dr. Kathryn Krase, how you doing?
I'm doing so well, Boz. Thanks so much for having me.
No problem. It's crazy calling you Kathryn, first of all.
Please do. It's been long enough. No professor right now.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of stuff has happened. Good, a lot of great things has happened. So we're gonna talk about that and all the amazing things that you have done. We still keep in touch through the wonderful tool
Social
of
media.
LinkedIn.
Exactly.
Especially LinkedIn. LinkedIn is really,
Yep.
I need to get back into it more consistently. So it's definitely helped. So let everybody know who you are and
Sure.
what you've been doing in our wonderful, exciting field of mental health and social work.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me on. Super excited. I've been following you on LinkedIn, seeing what you've been up to, and was completely honored when you kind of did a shout out and said, "Anybody want to chat on the podcast?" I'm here and I'm excited to be here. So my name is Kathryn Krase. For everybody out there who doesn't know me, I am a social worker and a lawyer, and I myself went to that unnamed graduate school as a student and then went back and taught there as an adjunct for a few years. But I started my life in social work when I did a dual degree program at that school in law and social work. So I graduated with both my MSW and my law degree.
Oh,
and
nice.
a big interest in family law. And I was really interested in the lives of families and children. I specifically was interested in policies that could help families and children. So when I first went to grad school, I was interested in income support programs and specifically welfare programs at the time. Could kind of date myself. I graduated college when TANF came into being, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. And so I was concerned that the change of the federal welfare programs was that change was going to really negatively impact poor families, because I believe that's what the policy was designed to do. It was really designed to isolate poor families at the margins. And so that's what my goal was, actually, to do policy related work. And that's why I got my MSW and my JD at the same time. Not the main reason why most people go to get their social work degree. So social work school for me was kind of an isolating experience, because most people that I was in school with wanted to be clinicians, and I give full faith and credit to clinicians, but that was not my intention, and it's not my strength. But I was really interested in policy work, and I thought it was important to have the social work perspective in policy work, because it wasn't just looking at the law and how do the mechanics of policy happen, but really about the people that get impacted with the policy.
Yeah, absolutely. And more policies is needed with these last, I would say, since 2015, 2016 with the whole 2016 election, and
2016 scared me
and
very
then
much, and the resulting 4 years were not a surprise and a real problem for specifically for families, and specifically for families on the margins who are purposefully put that way and put there through policies at the national, state, and local levels. And it's largely families of color and lower income families of color. And those have been the communities that I've really focused my work on since then.
yeah, and I kind of see that stuff here in my new state of Delaware that kind of doesn't get really talked about, especially when we have a good segment population that are undocumented, and it's kind of like you don't there's nothing that I've seen is really like in place in my
To
town,
support them.
at least in my town that I'm in. I know at the school district I work at, they just trying to figure something out, but the more time wasting and trying to come up with ideas, you're not servicing them appropriately. So
Right. And they serve the economic engine of the state of Delaware. I mean,
yes.
Delaware companies come to Delaware because of the no corporate tax rates in
Mhm.
Delaware. And then that brings people to work there. And then the undocumented come to support those who are working for the corporations, and the benefits don't trickle down. The support is not there. They're restricted from receiving a whole bunch of government support that anybody else would be able to get. And it's a challenge in all localities. And it's a frustration. Here up in New York City, where I'm from and where I've grown up, because there's just a larger, more politically organized community of immigrants, whether documented or undocumented, there's a lot more support. But when I try to teach my students in New York about how life is outside New York, like now you're living it, Boz, right? Delaware is different, and
yes.
You probably didn't realize how much different it was than New Jersey. It's only over one state line.
Yes.
But it's a huge difference. And the further you get from the Northeast, the bigger the differences are.
Yeah, I mean, it's between obviously you travel to visit family, and then but to actually living and work in the community and just driving around, and you just notice the differences, and this is this is you're taken aback a little bit, and you kind of like, why is this not happening? Why? Or just focusing on building new construction and housing, which is great because you're always going to need housing. But now we with this pandemic, and we talk about mental health being in the forefront, but there's no boys and girls club. There's no after school program or something in the community in place. And it's like, where are these kids supposed to go? Besides their backyard, if they have one in their own house, you have to interact with other kids, and besides school and things of that nature, have a community, whether it be nonprofit or for profit, some sort of agency in place to help families out, and undocumented families, or just any family with housing that needs assistance. People lost their jobs, people lost income, people lost family members, and things like that. We need all this stuff in place, and nothing's being done.
And that's the big challenge. You mentioned 2016 and the election of 2016, and 8 years of President Obama, we were moving in a particular direction economically, but the reality was there hasn't been much of a change since the 1970s towards the direction of those who have more, mm-hmm. and those who don't have any more. And if anything, they have less. And those are policy decisions at the state, local, federal levels that continue to disadvantage groups that don't have. And there's lip service paid to providing at least, there's a theory in the policy world, in the social welfare policy world, that policymakers know to give the poor enough to keep them quiet. And it's this revolutionary theory in policy, social policy. And so when we get big crisis like we had with COVID, we got a lot of great advances in social welfare policy. So for those of us with kids, we got this extension of the child tax credit, which instead of having to wait to file your taxes to get this money, we got the money straight to us. And that was great for everybody who legally is on the tax rolls.
Right.
But if you're not, right, then you were further disadvantaged. This policy was, and remember, it wasn't even a change in the way that it was budgeted. The money was going to be ours when we filed our taxes. So we just got it earlier, but it ended up taking millions of children out of poverty. Millions of children out of poverty with something that was just a bit of accounting that could have been done at any point in time by the federal government. And what's scary is that it has the potential to lapse and go, and we need the political pressure on our policymakers to remind them, like, no, we need to keep these families out of poverty because of anything COVID this time, post the Trump presidency, and then throw on COVID, like we are down a hole. And especially for families who have low income and low wealth, they don't have the resources that, honestly, I putting out my privilege, like I am an upper middle class white lady who I'm stepping on the backs of my family before me. I'm fourth generation American, and they've each been able to build up wealth, but largely because they were assimilated as white folk in this country and, discriminated at the beginning, but after a generation, our skin color has helped us. And so I have the benefit of that intergenerational wealth, but many communities don't have access to that. And COVID has just really exacerbated that concern. I just heard on the radio today that New Jersey, the eviction moratorium ends next month. And so that's a big concern in terms of what's going to happen to people who still can't pay back their rent because they lost work.
Right. And I want to give credit to the school district that I'm currently working at, that they thought about that, during like the teacher orientation, which I was a part of, and
great.
Like I brought that up, like, hey, like, these moratoriums gonna lapse, like, what are you guys are doing about that? Because I worked at another school district prior, and like I saw that the beginnings of that happening, and there was no housing available it's not like New York that was like, we could put you in the, go through the intake shelter that's downtown, or like the men's shelter down. So there's
no family
one
priority.
Place, and there's one place here in Delaware that sent everybody to it. Is like this kind of crazy. And then like, so what are you doing? Like, oh, we've already identified certain families already from like the last school year to now, and like we see more and more families, and we're trying to get it ahead of that. So that's just more and more coming, and you just have to pay attention. I know for the last 2 years, there's been focusing on many things, but learning more about housing, and really pay attention to the housing moratoriums just throughout the country, not just in the Northeast, just to really see, and from a social work perspective, like, hey, this is going to be on the lookout for this, because people are going to be struggling to look for housing, and there's not much housing available because rents have skyrocketed significantly, and all over the country. So it's just, where are people going to go to live?
Exactly. No, housing is a really tough one. And just to kind of remind ourselves that there was a housing bubble in the early 2000s that led to the subprime mortgage debacle that resulted in the Great Recession, right? And so we have to be really wary of a recovery from COVID that doesn't really address the housing crisis, because there's still people who they didn't just lose their homes in the crisis of 2008, they lost their ability to ever own a home again. And they have children who don't have the wealth that people like I do to fall back on intergenerationally. And so it's kind of creating, you lose that ladder for people to gain access to, you know, the goal of owning a house. Well, maybe we don't all need to own a house, but how about we can afford our rent and it's a good place to live?
Exactly that.
Why is that so hard?
Exactly, like half your income is going right to rent, and then you like trying to juggle the other bills. So it's kind of crazy what's going on.
It's a challenge. It's a challenge for sure.
Yeah, so let's get into like the work that you did and or that you been doing. So you left let's do a chronological order. So I graduated my MSW 2010. So from 2009, from where you at, where the social work research 1 and 2. What happened after that?
So I graduated with my PhD right around that time, and I got a job working at Ramapo College of New Jersey, which at the time was an undergraduate only social work program. It's a public New Jersey public college, and it's a great program, and I loved it there, but it was far away from my house. I live in Brooklyn, and driving to New Jersey, exactly, doing the reverse commute was no joke. But I had 3 great years there, and then I got a job teaching at LIU Brooklyn, Long Island University's Brooklyn campus, which is only 2 miles from my house. So I worked there for almost 9 years in their social work program. They have an undergraduate and a master's program in social work. And so I was teaching research and policy there for 9 years. And it was through both of those experiences that I was able to start doing research of my own. And most of my research focuses on the reporting of suspected child maltreatment, and with a specific focus on the impact that professional reports from professional social workers, teachers, doctors, et cetera, the impact that our reports have on what we call racial disproportionality in the child welfare system. So the reality that Black and brown children are overrepresented in the child welfare system. It's a phenomenon that's been studied for the past 20 years. Finally, with a level of concern. It's existed for the past 50 years without a level of concern. And I've been studying how reports, right? So mandated reporters in particular, what is our role as mandated reporters in creating the problem of racial disproportionality, right? Black and brown kids are overrepresented in child welfare. And it's not just about, some people early on said, well, Black and brown kids must be experiencing child abuse and neglect more than white kids. And there is a relationship there, but the issue is that Black and brown kids are more likely to be poorer than white kids, and parents and families that are living with lower income are more likely to abuse or neglect their kids, because as you know and I know, parenting is hard.
Yes.
And when you have the added stress of living in poverty or having unstable housing, or dealing with a medical issue or a mental health issue, or you're having a family crisis, right, then it makes parenting even harder. And so what I was interested in looking at and learning about is whether different professionals, whether reports from different professionals was making a difference in racially disproportionate reporting. And unfortunately, what I found is that we all types of mandated reporters, unfortunately, contribute to the system of racial disproportionality. And so I've been working in the past 10 years or so to raise awareness through my mandated reporter training, and specifically my training and my writing, to get mandated reporters to really think about what their role is. Because if you remember the training you had to take when you were in your MSW program, a lot of the training for mandated reporters just says, you have a concern, make a report.
Right.
But what we're learning is, unfortunately, through the lens after George Floyd's murder, right, we're learning that systems like the criminal justice system and the child welfare system, which is it's very similar to the criminal justice system. We call it a quasi-criminal system because it quasi meaning kind of, sort of like a criminal justice system, right? There's you get these allegations of abuse or neglect, and there's court processes and investigations, and you can get your kids taken away from you temporarily or even permanently, right? These are serious repercussions that come from the potential when you make a report. And so a lot of people are raising red flags about calling the police over issues that don't really need police intervention. And so there's also a movement out there to make mandated reporters think about, do you really need to make this call? Like, when are you mandated to make a call? And when do you have a concern that doesn't require a report to CPS? And so that's a lot of what my work is right now, helping mandated reporters acknowledge they have a legal responsibility to make reports because the law says so. And I'm a lawyer and I can't tell people not to do what the law says, but to also think of themselves as professionals and to use their professional thought process, their professional autonomy, their professional skills to in some cases, if they don't have to make a report, don't make the report and do something else to help the family, especially because reports disproportionately impact Black and Brown kids and families.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's great. And you bring up a very good point regarding, calling the police. Like, just for the record, I have police officers friends in New York, and they do, amazing work too. But, police officers and some rightfully so, we've seen with, George Floyd, we've seen countless victims who end up being killed by police or police brutality. We've seen it time and time again. Yeah. And do you really need to call the police? You bring up a very good point, or maybe come up with a program or call CPS that, it won't. We're not calling you to make a case, but at least to provide. They're supposed to provide supports. Like, that should be the last resort of taking the kids away, and do what you do after, like the aftercare, or when the children get removed and then they go back home, and then there's aftercare after that. I started in the field of foster care, so we did that, and that's how we get cases. So they should do like before. Okay, we have a concern. Let's see what we could do. For the family. Now we get those supports are not in place. Then okay, we did this in place, and you already have all this evidence that we did this, is not working, or the parents are not doing what they need to do. Okay, now the next step is okay, we gotta put them in foster care.
Exactly. Like right now, I think it's clear to most people who have a close view of the system that the system doesn't work.
Yes.
And a lot of mandated reporters, though, haven't had that first level experience that you've had, Boz, or that I've had by being in, I was involved in the court side of things and you in the agency side of things, but a lot of mandated reporters never get to see that. And so they make a call and they mean well, right? They're calling because they have a concern, and they are making an assumption that the system is going to help. And unfortunately, that assumption isn't always a good one, because sometimes the system doesn't help, it actually
makes
hurts.
It worse. Yep.
And so I think about cases, and I've had cases where, family was going through a tough time, but the call actually made it worse for them, because it wasn't giving that. The call resulted in an investigation, which meant that the parents had actually less time to spend paying attention to the issue that their child was having. And they were worried that they were being judged, and they were scared that somebody was looking at everything that they were doing. And so then they started second guessing themselves. And, anxiety is real, and anxiety impacts. And then they weren't sleeping well. And then, maybe they have one more drink, right? Or smoke a joint because they want to calm themselves down. And then they get in trouble for doing those things. And the system doesn't recognize that the system doesn't always recognize that the involvement in the system is a problem. So there are policy efforts across the country, including in the states that we're in, that do seek to provide an alternative to the traditional CPS intervention. So in cases where there's low risk to child, when a report's been made, they have what's called a dual track or alternative response system, where the the CPS is supposed to come in, and instead of doing a traditional investigation, they're supposed to do more of a family assessment, more of a mental health perspective. But as you and I know, most CPS workers are not social workers. They're not mental health professionals. And so they don't necessarily have the training or the professional orientation to kind of have that more global view on what families need. So we definitely need larger system impact to make some changes. But I do think for us here in New York State, we've had some really good policy changes in 2021, and we have some good policy changes in CPS coming up in 2022. And I think if New York can get some of these policy changes done and they work for families, then hopefully they'll extend to other states as well. The policy changes in New York are specifically geared at reducing penalties to families. Let's say a family gets that a report is made and the report is substantiated, but the case doesn't go on to have, CPS doesn't think that they need to place the child in foster care or go through with a family court case. Well, right now in New York, if you were in New York, or here I am in New York, if there was a substantiated case against me, it stays on my record for 10 years after the youngest child in the household turns 18. So if I had an infant right now and I had a substantiated case against me because of something with my teenager, right? That report would stay on my record until my baby turned 28. And so for 28 years, I couldn't get a job in a school system.
Wow.
Because when they do that child abuse registry index check, right, it's going to say that I'm a child abuser.
Yeah.
Even if it was just a one-time horrible decision that a parent makes, right? But where is the chance for giving people a second chance? And so the law is changing to allow families to challenge those records. Not that those records are going to go away completely, but that they can be hidden from that child abuse registry index check. So if there is another report to CPS will know about it. Mm-hmm. But that if that parent wanted to apply to a job to a school, as long as the judge agrees that that report should not stop them from getting that job, then it would give that parent that job back, that opportunity. And that's huge. That's economic empowerment.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's a really important law that's coming up here in New York State starting in January.
Well, that'll be so huge, because 28 years, that's
too long.
That's way too long. It's
too long. And I had a number of parents, one parent in particular who they had an altercation with their teenager, and they weren't proud of what they did. They hit the teenager, they hurt the teenager, but it was a one-time thing. They were remorseful. The child it was an altercation between the two of them. The child felt responsibility, and then the child felt guilty because the parent lost their job. Mm. And so it's those kinds of cases where the parent would have access to that job again, where the parent wouldn't have to lose the job just because they made one bad decision. And those are the kinds of things and because these situations disproportionately impact Black and Brown families because of the way that the systemic racism impacts all of these factors, right? These laws will help help protect Black and Brown kids. I want to tell you about one other really important thing that happened in New York.
Yeah, absolutely.
So because I'm on the law side of things a lot, I find the court system piece of it fascinating. So back in the 1980s, this is before my time, but one of my former bosses, Marty Guggenheim, he's an NYU law school professor, and he tells his students a story all the time about showing the South African visitors in the 1980s. He showed them Manhattan Family Court because South Africa, it was during apartheid, right, and kind of political upheaval, and they were visiting the US, and the idea was that the US was going to show them the better way of running their government. And so the South African delegation was visiting Manhattan Family Court with Professor Guggenheim. And as they left Manhattan Family Court, the delegation turned to him and said, okay, now show us the court for your white families, right? Because here they were in this court that was supposed to be New York City family court,
Right.
and all the families that were in that court were Black and brown families. And it was a clear indication of how systemic racism, we don't need apartheid. We don't need a policy of separation in New York in 1980 for it to be apparent to visitors how segregated our system was. So now flash forward or skip 30 years, almost 40 years. I can't believe it's 2022. Almost, here we go. So 2022, we have this changing representation, changing understanding of the system. We had cases in 2021 of a change in policy that they tried this new thing in family court out in Nassau County. So now I'm talking about judges in Nassau County Family Court on Long Island up here. They decided that they would be part of an experiment. So when cases came to their attention and they had to make a decision about whether to remove a child from the home, normally how they do it is Child Protective Services comes in front of the judge and they tell the case, and the judge gets to see the name of the kids and the name of the parents and where the parents and the children live, along with all the allegations. And the parent and the child are not in the courtroom at that time. And the Child Protective Services says their whole case to the judge, and they're trying to get the judge to order a removal of the child from their home. And it's done what we call ex parte. So it's done without the parents or the child in the courtroom. And it's always been done without the parents or the child in the courtroom. During this experiment last year, what they did is they took the names off of the paperwork and they took the addresses off the paperwork. So all CPS could do was say what the concerns were, but they couldn't say the names or what neighborhood these families were from. So it de-identified the families, which ultimately made them raceless.
Right.
Right? No guessing if the family is Hispanic or
Right.
Black or white or whatever based on where they live or what their name is. And guess what happened? There became no differences in removals between Black, brown, and white families. The year before, Black and brown families had more removals than white families. But once they they de-identified the cases from the judges, all of a sudden the white families are getting their kids removed the same rate as the Black and the brown families. There's no differences. And so the judges in family court had to admit that they had implicit bias against Black and brown families that they didn't even realize was happening. And that they were removing Black and brown kids at a higher rate because they were Black and brown. Now, they could have been not removing the white kids, right? That could be part of the implicit bias. It might not just be anti-Black or brown, but it might be pro-white in their calculations. But by de-identifying the cases, it took away the racial differences, which is fascinating.
Fascinating, absolutely.
And now they're talking in New York State in particular about doing that across the board, right? Shouldn't all judges across New York State in those particular cases if you're not going to see the person in front of you, if the person's not going to be in the courtroom anyway, then you shouldn't know what their name is or where they come from, right? So that it should be what we call a blind removal, right? If the facts are the facts, then that's what you make the decision on. So that's one of the most encouraging research studies out there that unfortunately confirms the racial disproportionality and the racism in the system, but at the same time really demands change, and hopefully we get the change.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That would be a huge, game changer. And you talk about professor in Manhattan Family Court in 1980s or in the 80s.
Yep.
And I started working in foster care January 2002. and spent some time going to Manhattan Family Court, and this was that like 20 years,
Yeah.
and like nothing changed. Like
Nope.
still seeing like black and brown folks, and the lawyers majority, like I would say like 85% were white,
Or white. Yeah.
and like but all most of the clients there are black or Latino.
Agreed.
Crazy.
It's completely crazy. And people haven't thought about it critically as much as they should. And I have to admit, when I was working in the system back then as I was a young white lawyer, and I didn't think about it. But you learn and you change and you grow, and it makes us all better people and better professionals if we're willing to acknowledge that we might be part of a system that isn't as great as we hope it could be, right? And social work in particular has its problems, my friend.
Yes, many problems in the
and
field.
and that's why you need to rant. Right.
Yes. No, absolutely. It's about, making our voice heard, and like using, the podcast to have wonderful people on, like yourself, and all my guests that's been on the podcast, and all my future guests has been on the podcast, and talk about their great work that they're doing in the field. And we all struggling somehow, some way during this pandemic, and think about whenever a real post pandemic, how it's going to look, and how it's going to affect us, so in social work and mental health. What's that going to look like? And
I
the
hope we see it soon.
yes, and the lack of supports from the government, or from the federal all the way to the locals, to NASW, the national chapters, is a mess.
Agreed. There's a lot going on, but you also know me, like I'm hopeful. I do think that change is possible. And I think that I'm really encouraged by the young people out there, and specifically the young social workers. I'm involved in a group right now of social workers who are really interested in completely shaking up the system of mandated reporting, looking to eliminate mandated reporting, and really change things in the child welfare system. And I, I'm all for change. Like, we need change, and sometimes the only way to get change is to kind of blow up expectations, right? To think about what would be otherwise unthinkable. I never thought 20 years ago that I'd be in a group of social workers who were literally talking about what the world might be like without mandated reporting.
Yeah,
And
that's fascinating in itself, what that might even look like.
yeah,
Because to do mandated reporting on somebody, or off a hunch, or just a possibility, and like if I don't make this call, like I'm my risk like losing my license. Should I do it, not do it? Then like you don't really think of like ramifications of like, what if the police come and have a racist cop knocking on somebody's door, and breaking the door down, and there's consequences to that, as constantly see on the news, or like
yeah,
have like nosy neighbors making
neighbors.
calls, like just for vendetta, or just to be nosy and making a call, like making
Yeah,
up something, or kids like making up something just because their parents pissed them off one time, and it's like, and then you have like a whole case, and for off of nothing, like nothing happened, and all of a
yeah,
sudden you got a case coming up. Or we got kids who have fetal alcohol syndrome disorder, and one of the symptoms is, you make up stories, and some stories are really like out of hand, and could get you a CPS case real quick, in a blink of an eye, without you doing anything. Just
yeah,
so is scary. Like, all it takes is one time something that happens, like relationships.
yeah.
And
And
anybody could be a client, quote unquote client, real quick, if just not careful.
exactly. But the sad reality is that statistics suggest that specifically Black families,
Yes.
half of Black families get reported to CPS in their lifetime, like half. It's just absolutely an astronomical number. And what's astronomical, makes it even worse, is that more than 3/4 of reports don't get substantiated after investigation. So the reports are being made, but CPS isn't finding any abuse or neglect. And so all of these families are getting intervention, or getting the trauma of the investigation. And then for what? Like, if they're not getting help and they're not getting support. And so we really need to think about what this system is about. And I remind people all the time, like, for us as mental health professionals, social workers, psychologists, counselors, KSACs, right, MHCs, MFTs, like, we know more about the families and family functioning and systems theory and ecological theory. Like, we understand when we make a report, or we should understand when we make a report, what impact that could have, not just on the family, but also on the community. A lot of mandated reporters don't have that perspective. You know, they don't see the depth of what we see, or the potential. And so a lot of, as you said, like, a lot of mandated reporters, they feel like, I have to make this call, even though I don't really think something's happening, because I don't want to lose my license. And I firmly believe there's a different way they can do that, and a way to cover your butt and still help the family. And so that's really what I've been trying to focus on, helping people understand, because I think the responsibility of being a mandated reporter is more than just covering your butt. I think you have an ethical obligation to the families and communities that you serve.
Yeah, I totally relate to that, and agree with you with that. Now, teaching social work research, do you find it with students? Or no, a lot of my listeners are in their, like, early, mid to late 20s,
Sure.
probably in grad school, or just completed their MSWs. Do you find the social work students are there enjoying research a little bit more, and, or at least have a better,
Come on, Baz.
a better, I guess, appreciation, at least a little bit, towards research?
I think post 2016, what my experience was with social workers coming into the field after the election of Trump is social workers are way more aware of fact, and the importance of actually knowing what's true and what's not true. And the hard thing about research is research isn't perfect. Right. And that's one of the points that I always make over and over again when I'm teaching research. Like, research is not perfect. And even my research isn't perfect. I have to admit that too. But it's something, and research builds on something. And we're learning a lot about research in real life with just the work on COVID,
Yes.
right? And how what we think today might be very different than what we believe is true 3 months from now. And for a lot of people out there, a lot of people watching Fox News, right? Anytime research shows a change, it makes people skeptical about the research. And what they don't understand is that this is how science works, right? Science builds on itself. So what we believe we know from science one day, we might be challenged later on when we have a larger sample, when we have a different sample of people, when we have different conditions that we're looking at. And so I do think that I did find that social work students were more interested in the real life applications of how knowledge is made through research after 2016. Gotcha. Because, even just to understand how people interpret statistics. I mean, that's another pet peeve of mine. I get frustrated when I see news outlets reporting statistics and they don't know what they're talking about. And if you know research, then you can tell that they don't know what they're talking about. But if you don't know research, then you're just going to listen to whatever the newspaper says, because why would the newspaper not be telling you the truth? And it's not that the newspaper's lying to you, it's that the newspaper didn't take, the person writing the article for the newspaper didn't take enough research classes. And so social workers have a benefit. I mean, those 2 research classes come in handy when it comes to that knowledge. You have a lot more knowledge about research than most of the people out there.
So it's not just torturing MSW students. There is some point.
It's not just torturing. It's not just torture. There's some value to it, I promise. But it also differentiates social workers from a bunch of other mental health professionals. They get that access to research and that understanding of research, not just from the perspective of using research findings, but also how to design research, because it brings your brain alive to the choices that are made. You know, we keep getting told over and over again, evidence-based practice, which is great, but you know, if you're working in a low-income community of undocumented immigrants, and the EBP that gets brought in was developed at the Yale Child Study Center, like this isn't, you know, you can't manualize, you can't take that manual from Yale and bring it into this community. You need to understand how to update. And I do think social workers in particular, because of our research classes, can understand some of those details. I hope it's worth it. It was worth it to me.
I just get it all the time, and I still see it on Twitter from time to time about, you know, research class, and like, I want to be done with this research class. And I know I was like that. There was no knock on you. It was just research. Easy. Yes, it wasn't easy, and I was beyond stressed out. Like I full transparency, I neglected my wife. I was at the time. I'm stressed out. I'm like working a full-time job and going to grad school, and this research class. I got to do all this work and papers for research, and research stresses me out. Like, bye.
Well, you can put it behind you, but it's always there. It's always there.
I got a good laugh at it now, like just like research and then still see it, like, yes, but it's important, and it helps. And so research. So when CDC says something, is actually do the research, not just them flip-flopping and just.
And this is why the combination of everybody's favorite classes, right? Policy and research do matter. So when it comes to the CDC flip-flopping, it's not just research, but it is research-based. But there are also policy implications, right? And we all have to think about, we know how we can stop the pandemic. We can make everybody sit in their houses for 6 months, you know, but we can't really make everybody sit in their houses for 6 months. We tried, and that didn't work because people didn't just sit in their houses for 6 months.
Yes.
You know, we can't even get people to leave their masks on when they're supposed to, you know, and so those are the kinds of realities, right? The research can even show us what will work, but it can't make it work.
Yeah, I mean, so during the summer of 2021, when, you know, CDC and Dr. Fauci was like, you don't have to wear masks. And then so people stopped wearing masks, and now like, we got to wear masks again. And like, people like, what? I'm one who, you know, respects, you know, all the science. They know way more than me, but I think that was a huge mistake when they said people stop wearing masks. And now I could count on like both my hands and both my feet going somewhere and be one of those 20, you know, wearing a mask. And it's like,
I know,
I'm like the odd one out wearing. I'll wear a mask. So I think Michael Jackson was like ahead of his game.
Exactly.
I'm always someone wearing a mask.
He was prepared for the pandemic.
And we in New Yorkers, like, you know, seeing, working in Queens for most of my career.
Asian communiures have been adopting masks for a long time.
You know, on the 7 train in Flushing, they were ahead of the game with that. So and you see that. So it's unfortunate, like go to church and it's like, I want to go to church in person, but like I could count the number of people wearing masks, and it's just unfortunate, and who knows, like people
Well,
still
I
got to live
laugh
their
because
lives. And
my teenager will wear his mask because it hides his mustache and his every once in a while his acne too, right? So the teenage set,
yeah.
especially the teenage boys, don't mind the mask so much.
but I heard something about like uh COVID acne, because of the mask is giving people
Yes. Oh,
acne.
that's what
And
this was. I still have a spot on my face. I keep telling people, I'm like, I can't be 46 because I still have a pimple. This this on my face is, I know this is completely off topic, but I worked the election day
okay.
in New York City. I worked election day, and you start work at 5 o'clock in the morning,
Mm,
and you're not allowed to end work until 10 o'clock at night.
wow.
So you get, I guess we got 3 hours off in that time, but you couldn't
Mm.
take it all at once. But long story short, I had to wear my mask all day. And so I ended up with this on my face. That's from November, and it's still there. So that's my mask knee. But it saves
So
lives. And
yeah, absolutely.
the research is clear that it saves lives.
Yeah, no, and you could like laugh at it too, because I know I laugh about, like, I'm a heavy coffee drinker, and I think more so now than I ever been, and just smelling your own
Oh,
coffee breath
breath.
with the mask on, because I work in
It's
a
so
school
true.
and it's like mandated. I gotta have a mask on
Right.
until, unless there's nobody around me, and so like smelling the coffee breath, and it's like man,
Oh,
I'm like
feel bad for the people around me.
I smell coffee. It's like my own breath. Like I want some more coffee.
My husband stopped smoking cigarettes about a year before the pandemic. Um, and thank goodness, because I think he'd
Oh
knock himself
man.
out with that breath, but it's fine.
No,
Oh,
there's been some no funny stuff with this pandemic. You gotta like anything else. You gotta pull with the punches and just laugh, and people
and we
making
don't know
memes
what's
and
going to come. Yeah.
yeah. So it's
There's still more to come. We don't know what's coming. But the way that I try to live my life and for my son, in terms of, I know how lucky I am. And so the choices that I'm making are not for me. I'm trying to make choices that are going to be better for the community around me, for people who are less fortunate or without the same levels of privilege. And so if me wearing my mask means that other people are safe, like, I'm going to wear my mask. That's why I got vaccinated. That's why I got boosted. I also had the benefit. I understand why communities of color are wary about the vaccines, right? The United States government has a history of doing horrible things to Black and Brown communities on purpose. And
absolutely.
and so I understand why certain communities don't feel like they can trust what the government says. I have a different experience because I haven't had that I haven't had that experience. The government has done a great job of protecting rich white ladies like me, which is unfortunate. And that's
Right.
why I try to use my knowledge and my skills to share that wealth in many different ways. So
Yeah, and so it is kind of scary that myself being vaccinated and booted. I think I got the booster like here in Delaware. As soon as the news came out that you
yeah.
get boosted, I think like within like 48 hours, I went and got boosted, and I actually randomly met the governor
Oh,
and
wow.
briefly, and the lieutenant governor again, and she recognized me from like a previous event
Oh, wow. That's
with
awesome.
school. Was like, hey, I remember you. How you doing? So I got
Delaware's
boosted.
a small state.
Yes, that's the first thing I was told. Is a small state. You're gonna run into people and stuff like that. So, and then like I went home. Like, hey, Dad, they're giving the booster. Like, snatched them up from the house and
Yeah.
took them to get boosted. But it's scary that even with getting boosted, that people still getting this variant.
Omicron is different. We're learning again, the science is coming out day by day, right? And with Omicron in particular, it is getting past the vaccine. So my sister, who was boosted as soon as it came out, she got Omicron last week, but both of her children had gotten it. They were vaccinated, but all three of them, they were each sick, but not very, like none of them had a single day of fever. My nieces had what we call them the sneezels, like sneezing with sniffling for like 2 or 3 days. And then one of my nieces had a bad headache for a day, but my sister had the sneezels for 2 days, and that was it, no fever. And right, that's ultimately what immunity will do to people. That's the goal, right? Is that COVID isn't going to go away. We know that it's not that kind of virus that can have that level of control. But if it can become like a flu or like a common cold, where it's not, I think it's looking more and more like the flu than the common cold. Like the common cold, we know you're going to get sick, but nobody's really going to die from the common cold.
Right.
People die from the flu. Tens of thousands of Americans die from the flu each year. And that might be what COVID ends up being. And the reason why vaccination helps, and we can't trust herd immunity. We can't just let everybody get COVID, because if you get COVID without having some protection to it already, those are the people the unvaccinated are the ones who are in the hospitals right now with Omicron. They're the ones who are dying of Omicron. If you're vaccinated, unless you are an older adult or severely immunocompromised, then Omicron is not the threat. But that's what the threat is for older adults with the flu, right? My grandmother, who's been gone for 10 years, but her mother died in the flu pandemic of 1918. Her mother was pregnant with her 4th child, and her uncle got the flu, and her uncle was unmarried. And so he needed somebody to take care of her. So who better to take care of this dude, this unmarried dude, than his pregnant niece? And pregnant women were more susceptible to the flu of 1918. Pregnant women are more susceptible to the flu in general. We are very lucky that pregnant women and children are not susceptible to COVID the way that they were to the flu in 1918. The flu in 1918 actually, the people who were most impacted, disproportionately impacted by death from the 1918 flu pandemic were 16 to 24-year-olds and not older adults. So COVID's impacting a much older segment of the population.
Yeah.
But the hope, right? I guess the best case scenario is that 100 years from now, COVID is like the flu, the seasonal flu, where it probably is going to continue to kill people, most likely older adults, but hopefully not at that level, because people will develop over 100 years of COVID tolerance, and just hope we don't get another one. But again, research shows pandemics happen, right? Bubonic plague. We don't want to see the resurgence of that. We're not going to see that because it's controllable in a different way. But we are going to see something like this happen again, just hopefully not at this level. And hopefully we can remember what worked and what didn't through research.
and trust the research. I think that's been a big thing too, that we had a president who was like, what are you talking about? I'm doing my own thing, and people followed.
Terrifying.
It was a crazy time, and still now, like mentioned earlier, it seemed like yes, the science constantly changing, but it comes across that CDC and Dr. Fauci is flip-flopping. It's like, really, as of this recording, 5 days, you could go back if you're boosted, whatever, and I'm gonna take my 10 days. I don't care if it's gonna be unpaid, how it was before. Right. And no, it's too soon. And myself working with the kiddos who, I would say, I don't know of a number, but a random number. At least I would say 75% of the kids are probably not vaccinated yet. So to be putting myself out there and working with the kids, and you want me to do individuals, want me to do groups with
Yeah.
them and in a room, and the window barely opens, and like we
And
all
it's
like mask,
cold.
and it's
Yeah.
cold. And so it's like I'm putting myself, you know, in danger. I gotta do what I gotta do with work, and I'll always have my mask on and
Yeah.
stuff. And when the kids leave, like I got my Lysol spray. Now when they leave, I'll spray, and
You
just
got to
gotta
do
be
what you got to
safe.
do.
So it's a crazy time we in.
It is, but I'm hoping for better days.
So,
That's the only way that gets me through.
yes. How was give a couple highlights of 2021 for you?
Highlights of 2021 for me. I quit academia. That was the biggest thing for me. You know, I was a professor for 15 years at 3 different institutions, and I love teaching. You know, I love teaching. I love
Yeah,
my students. I'm
you're
really
good at
proud
it
of the
too.
work. Thank you, friend. I love working with students, but academia, education in general, there's just a business element to it
Mhm.
where the incentives I just don't think are what is needed right now. And I needed a break. I needed a break to kind of focus on what's important for me. And I'm I have the ability to do it. My husband has a good job. We have we own our house. You know, as I mentioned, I've got all of these privileges, and so I'm trying to take that time and so I took a break and I'm working. I'm working a lot. I'm doing trainings and I'm writing. I've got a book coming out soon on mandated reporting, and I stuff that I've been meaning to do, that I've wanted to do, but I
Mhm.
couldn't do because I had to teach 5 classes a semester, even though I didn't want to teach that many classes because there's so many students who are coming into social work right now. And
Yes.
I'll be back. I'll be back in the classroom at some point. I can't imagine being gone from it forever, but I think it's really important for everybody out there to know that it's okay to change and we grow as people, and that if you might think that the job is right for you right now and next year it might not be, or you might have a job for 15 years and think it's right for you and need a change. And I'm a firm believer in following your soul. And if we're only on this planet for this one life, then however you can control it so that it's the best life that you can have for yourself and your family is what I hope for everybody. And I'm trying to use my privilege through the work that I do so that those same privileges can be afforded to everybody, regardless of their income or race. So I'm feeling really empowered by the change that I've made. And so 2021 was a tough year, but I think a good year. And so I am hopeful for 2022. And I don't know what 2022 is going to hand my way. And I think I'm a control freak, type
Mhm.
A control freak. And so COVID has really made me more aware of how little control I have. And so I'm trying to take control of what I can and be open to those things that I can't control and try to enjoy the unknowingness of things because I'm getting too old. I'm getting too old for this. I got to enjoy it.
No, no, absolutely. We enjoy what we can control. We only can control what we can
Yeah.
control, and I find that struggle with that a little bit too. I'm usually like lay back and like, all right, stuff happens. Okay, like figure it out and try to problem solve. And if it's going to take a while, all right, it's a work in progress, and understand it's a work in progress, and move on to the next thing. So it is what it is.
Yeah.
But
It's no joke.
so you got a book coming out 2022.
I do. I've got a book coming out, my mandated reporting book. It's called Making the Tough Call. And it's going to be 4 different books, but the first one
Mhm.
coming out is specifically for social workers, psychologists, MFTs, MHCs, CASAC. So specifically for behavioral and mental health professionals. And this is the This is the antithesis of a textbook, my friend. This is telling this what mandated reporting is from the perspective of somebody who's done a lot of work and research and training, but making it understandable and making professionals realize that they're professionals and that there's a lot to think about, but that you're not alone in thinking about it, and kind of giving you the tools to empower you to be confident in the decisions that you're making, whether you make a report to CPS or whether you choose not to make a report to CPS. And so I've been thinking about this book for a long time, and I'm super excited to get it out there and see what people think.
That sounds extremely interesting. I definitely would get that book. So we got something in common. I got my book coming out 2022 too.
Awesome. What's yours about?
Is a poetry book based on well, I lost my mom in 2020, so it was
I'm
like,
sorry to hear that, Paz.
thank you. So it's basically like talk about like almost like real time of writing everything that my struggles of grieving loss, how like writing the messed up way I had to identify like her body and stuff like that, and then like celebrating my wins too, because I'm like a new first time homeowner, 2021. Learning about stocks and building wealth, and not only for myself but also for my kids, and provide that education for us Black and brown folks that, hey, like besides, yes, you could have a loss, you could have a grief, loss, whatever, but still, if you have a goal in mind, and my goal going into 2020 was become a homeowner, so that actually, despite my loss, I still had a goal in mind of becoming a homeowner and learning everything that I've been learning with stocks and finances and all, reading books on it and stuff like that. So, and providing that education too, and just it's called Triumph Through Pain. How to
I look
maximize
forward to reading that.
how to maximize your full potential. So and that's basically what I've been trying to do since the pandemic started, just maximize my full potential and getting these multiple streams of income somehow, some way. The podcast was born in 2020, so it's a lot of good things has happened despite on my anxiety and of pandemic and grief and losing clients during the pandemic. So it's
And
keep it.
writing is a process, right? It
Yes.
helps you process,
Yes.
right? A lot
It
of
helped with
people
my
are afraid
grief.
of it, but
No.
it's a magic. It's magical how when you put thoughts and feelings down in
So it
paper.
helped with my grief. The podcast has helped me grieve. So just like, and just using the podcast to network with other social workers and like social media has definitely helped. And like, hey, you want to get on the podcast? And like, so like that's how we connected again. So
Yeah.
So it's like, just have a smile on your face, keep pushing, keep grinding, and
You're doing it, man. And your
I'm
kids see it, and your kids know it.
know all about like leaving a legacy for my kids. They can always type in the social work podcast on YouTube since they always on the damn YouTube and like see my face and then knock on wood in case something did happen to me, they can always see my face forever. And my book, they can always read my words that I wrote and have it like slightly edited, and like it's me. Like you always will have a piece of me like forever as long as you live, and pass it down to their kids, and like look what your grandfather did, and like so it's like it's all about that, and leave a legacy for them, something that my parents weren't unable really to do for me. So like learning that lesson and like, all right, this is what I'm doing like for you, and like you guys gotta build on that. So and having that people understand that and teach that, and from my actions lead by example. Like, hey, like I could teach my kids that too. And there's so much information out there that I'm always like stressing my kids about with like the finances. Like we didn't have internet when I was growing up. Like stop messing on the damn YouTube and the Roblox and learn about some crypto or some NFT. Like make me some money. I'm trying to retire early from social work. Like
Get in there.
All you gotta do is one drawing, and maybe we can make $1 million. That's it. I quit.
Maybe that's 2022 for you, Baz. But I'm really impressed with the work that you're doing, and words matter, man, and your voice matters. So I'm really happy for you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so check me out. You can find my website is craseconsulting.com. That's all about me. The mandated reporting project is makingthetoughcall.info, .info, but I'm also on LinkedIn, Krase Consulting, Kathryn Krase, as well as Making the Tough Call. Anybody interested in law school and social work school, hit me up. We have a JDMSW network also on LinkedIn that's really great for people who are interested in both dual careers. And then also on Facebook, Krase Consulting, Krase, as well as Making the Tough Call. So I am out there. I'm not as much on Twitter, but I am at Kat Krase.
You got to get on the social work Twitter hashtag, and there's a lot of amazing work. Amazing social
Jonathan
workers.
Singer is a great guy.
Yes, so on top of everybody else on that, so it's a great resource for social workers as well.
Thanks so much. This has been awesome.
No problem. Great talking to you.
Happy 2022.
Yes, happy 2022.